passcode.
All right. Thank you very much, Ms. Sayo, and welcome everybody to our webinar on contract compliance in a suite integrated solution. So the concept here is that is it only just contract compliance as in the contract request, but will you look at the workspace as well? This is me. I am a member of the BPC here with Masayo. We are like the contract dynamic duo, but she's like Batman and I'm Robin. So we should be able to handle just about any question you have related to contracts today. So I'm really looking forward to this session because contract compliance is a conversation that I have rather regularly with customers. You know, it's not an area that we all step out in deployment with. We sometimes come around to contract compliance a little bit later as we mature in our buying processes, and we look to get more spend into our solutions. So this is a topic that's really good with customers who are new or mature into the Ariba solution set. Today's presentation is a little bit of a hybrid between a suite integration series that we did on, I think, earlier this year, and contract compliance that I did maybe last year or so. So I've kind of put these together. There's a lot of slides here. I will not necessarily talk to every single one of the slides, but you'll have a very comprehensive deck when we're done. Okay, so I am going to talk a little bit about what the concept of suite integration is, just to introduce that. Then we'll also talk about the differences between when you have an integrated and a non-integrated realm, because that impacts the master data, and then we're going to get into contract compliance. So some of this stuff in the upfront, I'm not going to spend as much time as I did in the suite integration webinar, but I've kept the material here for you. All right, so let's talk about what that means. For suite integration, what that means is that you have your solutions connected. And so we have the buying and invoicing, also known as procure to pay or P2O if you don't have invoicing piece to it. And then we have the strategic sourcing that includes sourcing contracts and supplier management. That includes SLP and supplier risk in there. And so when we integrate these realms, what we do is we connect them. And when we do that and we're using contract compliance, we begin the process of contract compliance with a contract workspace. The benefit of a suite integrated site is that we are sharing data. So there we have things like users and groups and master data elements of commodity codes and currencies and suppliers that we can share amongst our buying and invoicing as well as our strategic sourcing contract supplier management, right? So again, consolidated maintenance of the common data. We have one login for users, so we don't have to have them logging into two separate URLs. I do have customers that do not integrate their sites that have sourcing contracts, buying, invoicing, and don't integrate for different reasons. But anyway, that is a possibility, but it's seldom done. There's much more benefit to having them integrated, right? The seamless integration of all of those contracts. The lovely thing here is we can use our contracts to buy against. So we can source with our suppliers. We can actually even discover our suppliers out through the Ariba network, bring them in for sourcing events. We can manage the supplier life cycle through SIPM and SLP. We can also mitigate risk with the supplier risk portion and get into, you know, the assessments, and then get into contracts, and from contracts into compliance. And so, you know, we can bring all of these things together. Data from all the solutions is available in our reporting database, which is also a nice benefit there to be able to pull data in for your procurement activity as well as your contracting activity. And so we can also aggregate some of our search and common actions and those global access control by permission. But there are some differences, and one of the things that I mentioned before is that the data is segregated. So when we have suite integrated realms, we are able to share all of that data. In a non-integrated realm, the data is segregated. This is really noticeable in the supplier area, I find. So another area is, like I said, the supplier management. So in a suite integrated environment, we're using what we call like a partition supplier. We have the supplier locations, the remittance locations, but at the top level, we have that common supplier. And if it's coming from our contracts or sourcing, we often see that with an ACM. So the ACM identifier is then shared, and we create the partition record off of that. If not, if we're not integrated, those records are discrete from one system to another. And so in procurement, we have our own common supplier record, partition supplier locations that all exist, but it's not linked to the same common supplier that was generated or created in the strategic sourcing realm. Again, user, another big area of master data that is shared in a suite integrated realm. So we do have the common partition user, and then here in the in a non-integrated, we'd have just a sourcing common user, and a procurement user would be different. Group management, we can synchronize the groups. So there are some groups that are shared across the solution set. Things like a financial processing analyst are a shared group. Even contract manager is something that exists in both a buying realm and a strategic sourcing realm. So if we use those roles, they are shared in an integrated realm. In non-integrated, they're not synchronized. Commodity codes, very big. Commodity code is, I always say, it's like that silk thread that's woven through everything that we do in the Ariba solutions, from discovery to sourcing to contract to buy to invoice, out through the Ariba network on the back end. It's the language of the full end-to-end process. So commodity codes is shared in an integrated realm, and in a non-integrated realm, we could have, technically you could have a separate set of commodity codes upstream in strategic sourcing to your operational procurement realm, but in an integrated realm, I would not recommend that. That could be cumbersome, to say the least. Locale and currencies, again, these are things that we can share across the realms. Units of measure, a lot of folks don't think about this one, but it can be shared across the realms. So if you're thinking about a sourcing event, or if you're creating contract for compliance, those unit of measures and the items that you're sourcing or contracting, they can be shared into your buying realm. All right. So we're going to get into, okay, it says dashboard demo. Let me go do that because it tells me to do that. So hold on. All right. Get too far afield. As we take a moment. Okay, so this is a suite integrated realm. I'm logged in as a user. If I look across this dashboard, I am seeing things like my event status, my tasks. Those are things that relate to possibly a sourcing event. Tasks could be things in my contracts. I'm looking at expiring contracts and to-do items, right? So those are, now I primarily also, I'm looking at within my documents and my to-dos, I'm looking at different things here. So I'm seeing invoice, something that's to be reconciled, that's an invoice reconciliation. I'm seeing contract workspaces that I may need to have some input on. there's quite a bit in here. Actually, I do a lot of contracts, apparently. So you can see in my to-do section, I also have an invoice that's sitting here to be approved. A lot of work in here. Asset, I think that's an asset or an advance ship. Not right now. So we have, there's a lot of work going on in my to-do section, that because this is my home tab, and I have watched projects and noted all of the things that are going on within this site. So this is a suite integrated site where I'm going to be able to see sourcing, contracts, my procurement invoice, my supplier management area, and even my contracts dashboard. So we have a lot of activity. If this was a buying only, I might only see procurement. I wouldn't even see invoicing. So I'd probably see procurement and catalog. Buying and invoicing, I would have the invoicing tab in addition to that. So depending on the different solutions that I have a subscription to would determine what tabs I would see here, and also my permissions as well. Right, so those are a lot of different things. So this is just a quick overview of a dashboard in a suite integrated site. Sairo, are there questions already?
Yes, there's one question that came in. I thought I was just going to answer, but it's better to come from you. So do you have any recommendations? Actually, hold on one second. There are two questions that came in. Is there any possibility to share the other data like departments from upstream to downstream?
So some of the accounting data is referenced, I guess. But the thing is, it's how it's used. So in procurement, we are looking at transactions, so that information is meant to code and transact. In the contracts space, we're not necessarily using it. So I mean, some of that, well, no, that's not true, because we use it in the pricing term. So I'm not sure how you're looking to use it, but some of the data can be replicated down even if it's not already considered a master data element. But what we talk about in suite integration, there's another element, like you said, department. Department might not, in my world of procurement, I would think of a cost center in that way. But if that's not what you're thinking and it's just sort of an enumeration, we could share that, but it wouldn't be necessarily a master data element. We would just make it something that we could reflect in either side. So not out of the box, but certainly through a customization that's probably achievable.
Okay. I have one more question. Do you have any recommendations around integrating Ariba Suite solutions and Ariba supplier chain collaboration?
Well, supply chain collaboration, and I don't want to get too far afield because we've got a lot of content today, but I'm just going to say supply chain collaboration for the most part is a network transaction. It's really occurring through the Ariba network and to your ERP, managing your inventory, towards your cost of goods sold. However, there are portions of it, and I do really talk to this sometimes with customers about the contracting element and also a good bit of tie-in to the risk, right? So supplier risk definitely ties into that as well, as far as managing your supply chain. So there are parts of the other Ariba solutions that I would say are really worthwhile integrating to supply chain collaboration, but from a suite integrated concept, we don't really talk about it a lot here in BPC, but it would certainly utilize things like your supplier data. But it tends to be integrated directly with ERP because of the way that most organizations use it. So, all right, I don't want to get too far, but if there's another question, I'll take it, and then we'll get back into our
This is,
presentation.
yep, this is it. So
Okay.
go right ahead.
Okay, let me just show from my slide and then swap them. Right, okay. So just a quick overview, some common terminology, as I like to say, around contracts. So a contract is an agreement that's going to identify some terms between us and the supplier vendor for purchasing those goods and services. And this is about repeated over time. That, like when we talk to customers about when to use a contract, it's not a one and done, right? That's not really what contracts are meant to be used for. From a buy process, we look for repeated activity. So we also look to manage our pricing and discounts. So contracts can typically include pricing, maximum total cost, discounts, a time period of term in which we're going to apply these, and then we can even put limits as to how much can be bought with a particular transaction. A release order contract requires an order, a purchase order before invoicing. The way that I like to explain that is the contract itself may be for $1 million, and then, but I really don't want the supplier to be able to invoice me for that $1 million day one. I want to release parts of that. Let's consider that my project budget, and I want to release portions of that as needed. So I communicate the need for the good or service using a purchase requisition to purchase order, and that's the release. So I release the funds to the supplier incrementally, however that is, through that mechanism of a purchase order. When we have no release, that's one that does not require a purchase order. It can be invoiced directly, and that makes good sense when we have things that might be unplanned services, or maybe the very routine type where we don't need to indicate that need for the service. It's automatic. We often talk about the idea of no removal here, but there's other things that can be kind of routine, utility-based, where we don't need to send the provider a release for the funds, or we don't need to communicate the desire for the need for the services. It's kind of automatic or assumed. So what is contract compliance? It is a set of features and functionality. So it is not something that you need as a separate subscription to. Once you have your buying and invoicing, you have contract compliance. And if you suite integrated and you have contract management, you have contract compliance with Workspaces. So this is not something where you have to sign and get something extra to your subscription. It's there. But there are parameters and things that we turn on to make it work, right? So that's why I say it's not a product or a standalone module. It's something that's built in, and we use a contract term document, also known as a contract request or pricing terms, and that is the piece that connects our workspace to our procurement. That is the bridge between those two areas. And what this does is gives us a great tool for compliance, right? So we look at compliance as a way to get people to buy at the rates that we've negotiated, or to buy the things that we want them to buy and not buy the things we don't want them to buy. So compliance can mean a few different things. And contracts offer a great deal of compliance for us. Now, compared to a catalog, the maintenance portion of a contract is on the buyer, whereas typically the maintenance of a catalog is on the supplier. So this sometimes is a factor in the buy process and how we decide which one we're going to use, but something to keep over. It allows us to give strict control over who can create, maintain, and buy against these contracts in the system through access controls. We can also create this structure of hierarchy within the contracts to aggregate and accumulate based on those pricing terms or those discounts, and to roll up the spend against the contract. So maybe I have a national agreement with a supplier but then under I have regional sub-agreements, but I want to cap that overall spend at my, again, could be my $1 million mark, whatever that is, and I need to make sure that all of those subs don't exceed that $1 million mark, and if they do, then I'm going back to the table and maybe renegotiating my terms, right, for a deeper discount. We also have searching and reporting functionality that allows us to track ordering activity and spend against the contracts. If you're not familiar with combined spend, we're not going to get deep into it today. We have an entire webinar on it, but this is an excellent tool for your strategic buyers to be able to see the buy activity directly in the workspace. Actually, we talked about some of this. So how does it work? So there's a couple of mechanisms, right? So the building blocks are a contract request and your configuration setting that are going to really start the whole process. And then we have the controls in for contract maintenance and contract releases. So maintenance, like amendment type of activity, and then the releases, meaning the requisition to purchase order. The compliance, so contract compliance it's based on a set of individual contract and configuration settings. That's basically what this comes down to. And it provides a strict control over who can maintain the contract and who can buy. So through those configuration settings, we're able to determine who can change it, but also who can buy from it. It's enforced through the enablement of the subscription of the contract items into the catalog hierarchy. So that creates this catalog basically for your buyers. It's streamlined for them. They don't really understand that they're buying off of contract unless they're pretty well educated as to what certain things in the UI mean. But basically, they're shopping in the catalog area, picking out their item. There's automatic line item matching of the requisitions to the available contracts. So that's a in the system. So let's just say you have a supplier level contract. Everything I buy from said supplier is discounted by 5%, right, across the board. So the user goes in and they find something in that supplier's catalog and they purchase it. And so it says, you know, the total cost is $100, but when they check out, it's going to eventually bring it down to $95 because you have that contract. User doesn't have to go in and match up that contract to the purchase that they're making. The system is auto-selecting based on the criteria in the system to know that you have that discount available to you and apply it to the purchase. Contract-related requisition approval rules, so that's really nice that we can, you know, some organizations will consider the contract approval, all the financial approval they need. They don't need further approval on the release, or they need minimal. So we can determine that maybe just a supervisor's eyes are all that's needed on contract-related requisitions compared to the standalone requisition, which really doesn't have much more other than the catalog behind it for compliance, right? So depending on how we're looking at all of this. We can receive against contracts, so the receipt of items or milestones also. Receiving is the traditional receiving of goods, but we can also do milestone-based project type items, and that's done directly in the pricing terms. And then we have the contract-related invoice exception types, so these are specific to that type. We'll get into the different pricing terms. I'm not going to go through all of these here. I'm going to actually show you in the UI some of this stuff. I just want you to know we have slides to it. But contract compliance in a suite integrated site, you know, we're enforcing compliance, we're tracking and monitoring performance, and then through the contract management piece of it, we can use our template libraries and our clause libraries and all of that to really create a standard process, a streamlined standard process for the way that we are So I sort of said this a moment ago. I talked about contract hierarchy, and what we talk about there is the ability to have a master level agreement, and then agreements under that would be these subs. So these are related, related, a set of related contracts that share accumulated amounts or pricing discounts, right? And when we create our contracts, we're able to designate this hierarchical type. So there's three. We have a standalone agreement, a master agreement, and a sub-agreement. This is something that once we elect and publish the contract, we cannot change. So once you establish that it is a standalone agreement, it is forever a standalone agreement. There is no amendment process that is going to allow you to change that. Okay. But the other thing is that within this hierarchy, there are types of contracts. So we have a supplier level, an item, a commodity, and a catalog level type of contract. And the supplier level contract is the broadest level of a contract. The item level contract is the most refined level of a contract. And you can never have a broader topic as a sub, meaning I can have a supplier to supplier. Suppliers being the broadest, I can have any other type under it as a sub-agreement. But if my master were to be an item level, the only other sub-agreements I could have would be items, because anything else would be a broader type of sub-agreement, and it would not support it. So we talk about next is the workspace. A contract workspace is a special type of spend management project. It is like everything that we talk about in sourcing. Project used to create a contract and contains all the contract-related documents. So we're talking about, well, when we get in a moment, you'll see. And it has containers, and it has collaboration areas for all the information related to a specific contract, and thinking about that contract as a project. Okay? So it's not just a simple negotiation. It is all the things that take place to end up with that final contract, that final negotiated signed contract. So again, documents, tasks, team members, external communication. So you're going to see that there's a message board in here as well. I think I'm going to kind of skip from here. You're going to see there's a lot of screenshots. So this is how it looks with terms and how to push these terms and what it looks like when it's published. And then we talk about the release orders. So I want to start to actually get into the site and show you some of this rather than to spend our time in the slide deck. So I'm going to come in and I'm going to create a contract workspace for procurement. Now, in a suite integrated realm, you can also begin with a contract request that would then be published into a contract workspace. We can actually even award a sourcing event with items and then generate the contract workspace for procurement. So that's really neat. And I think Colin Flaherty did some of that in a prior webinar. So if you do want to see that, I think he's done that with contract line item details. Okay. So I have started this process. Now I do have to have access to create the contracts in the site. So the user does not just get this. So you have to have the ability to create the workspaces in here through the contract permissions that are here. I'm going to go through some of these, not everything, but obviously a description is not required, but is highly recommended, so that when you're reporting on these things or you are just looking at what could possibly be in here, you have an understanding of why this contract was written, what's in here. If we wanted to put a related ID, let's say that this was a paper contract coming from my supplier system and they had a related contract ID, I could put that on here as well. I can also copy from one contract to another. So you can see here, I have a lot of prior ones that I could use. The test project, when I'm creating for compliance, will always be no, and that is so that it will publish my, my terms into my procurement area. This is really helpful for reporting purposes so that if you do a lot of just like loading of data and you want to not count it, you can filter on the test project yes to filter it out of reporting results. Okay. Now this is what I was talking about, the hierarchical type, master, sub, and standalone. For today's session, I'm just going to keep it at a standalone. No worries there. Supplier and affected parties. So let's just say this could be my, this could be my main supplier. My affected parties, I could actually indicate that I have more than one, and that might be because of sub-agreements or reseller agreements that I might have. And so if I want to track that within my reporting, I can do so. Proposed and the contract amount. So I might be proposing a certain amount, but then I might actually contract for a different amount. That just depends on what's happening. So I put it in like that. The commodity. Now these you can see are not required. These are not required values. Regions are definitely useful when we're talking about preferred supplier types, but also for category management. That's good. And if I had a predecessor, so if I wanted to link this contract to another workspace, I could do so through a predecessor project. I'll make my agreement date. The agreement was today, but effective the 1st, and my expiration date. I don't like to keep things in a test realm very long, so you'll usually see I create them for just a couple of weeks and let them expire just so we can have some fun with them. I'm going to use the combined spend template so that you can see a few things on here. So let's go ahead and create this workspace. And you're going to see here I'm brought to, I have a documents tab. So this is where my contract terms are going to reside, also any purchasing agreement. Now, because this is a contract for procurement, you're not going to see a lot of the other types of documents that you might have in a pure contract management workspace. So because we're doing contract compliance today, this is going to be a lot slimmed down compared to something that you might see when Masayo's doing ECA, because she's looking at it from a pure contract management perspective, whereas I'm looking at it from a compliance perspective. This is a buy tool for me, right? So here we have a list of tasks that will need to be completed and who the owner of the task is, and if there is a document that's associated to that. And then the team that I have that's related to this. So you can see that my approvers are not named. I'm going to go in and edit that. I'm just going to make myself the approver for today so that we can keep things simple and I don't have to log in as other users. Here's my message board. So you can see already I have, this is actually based on the template. It's welcoming everybody to the project. I can add, I can remove, I can create a whole new thread basically with the topic and so forth. The history of what's happening, so you can just see what I've been doing here. And then my spend tab, once this is fully published, now remember I put the proposed and the contract amount. So the contract amount is here, and once we start to see more activity, you'll actually see spend activity here. So let's go to my tasks, and I've edited my team members so I can mark that started and I can actually mark it complete as well. I'll get the final. So I'm going to go in and create my contract terms. I'll mark that one started, and let's go over to my documents and do that. So let's get into my contract terms. I'll go ahead and open that. And now you're going to see that a lot of information that I put on the workspace copied over to this area. So those values, my proposed, right, my effective date, my email notifications are based on a parameter setting, and so by default they're 30 and 7. We can always change those if we want. I did not talk about the term type, so we do have fixed, perpetual, and auto-renewal types. This means fixed means it's just based on the terms that I've defined here. Perpetual would be like an evergreen, so it's really just going to continue ad infinitum. And auto-renew, if I was to select that, it would give me renewal periods, and I could select notification timelines that go with that. That's the kind of contract where we don't necessarily want it to expire, but because we know we need to renew it. If there was a lapse, a complete drop of the contract, we could risk things from a business perspective. So we have a renewal period built in so that we do auto-renew the contract, and it will at least stay with its current terms while we consider whether or not we need to renegotiate anything during the renewal process. All right, let's get to our next step. So this is basically my header level to start my contract request. So now I want to pull your attention to, I moved out of the sourcing URL over to the buyer URL. This is my buying realm. I am now down in the operational procurement area, the dark side, as my colleagues like to refer to it. So this is, if I was not suite integrated, this is the point in time where I would start my contract compliance in a non-integrated environment. Physical location, if I want to note, where the hard copy of the actual printed document is, I could make that, Now, related contract ID, remember I put one in there earlier. Should the related contract ID be included as part of the system-generated contract ID? If I select yes, the really great thing about this, now this did not copy over from earlier, but I can put something in it here. This can actually be shared on the network to the supplier. So the supplier can see this related contract ID. So if it is their reference number, it's really nice to be able to do that. Right. And you're going to see in a moment when we create the contract ID that 78923 is going to be part of it. It's going to be appended. So we're working in our workspace, but now we've created CR, Contract Request 221. So we're creating a new document here. This is basically my buy terms. What am I going to buy from my supplier? Okay. So here I have an item level. This is that lowest level contract. But we talked about the supplier, the catalog, the commodity, and the item. Supplier is everything that I can buy from said supplier. So everything I buy from, Acme Unlimited is going to be a supplier level. Catalog level, I can define everything that I buy in, this catalog for that supplier. So not my non-catalog ad hoc items. They will not be covered, but it's still supplier specific. Commodity level is everything I buy of a commodity type, category type from that supplier. So rather than just saying everything that's in the entire catalog, maybe it's just the paper or the pens or the cups that I buy from that supplier. Item level is we're going to create non-catalog items and we're going to generate a subscription typically and publish them into the catalog so that users can buy them. So we're going to create the actual items. This is very common in a service-based where we don't have access to a catalog, but we want our users to buy as if. Okay? So I'm going to for today show you an item level. Is this a blanket purchase order? So a blanket purchase order in Ariba speak is a contract type. It is not necessarily just the fixed fee, lump of money, spend it down type of thing. It has some behavior on the network and also within the buying solution that's very supplier friendly. So the blanket purchase order actually shows up in the supplier's inbox somewhat like a purchase order does in our buying and invoicing realm. So it's very easy to transact against from a supplier perspective. It also has impact as how revenue recognition occurs across the network. So that's another, again, supplier-friendly kind of format. For today, I'm not going to elect it, but if you did, you would see that you could then hide the unit price from the supplier and hide the amount from the supplier. So that's another thing that it offers you is the ability to hide those amounts if you don't want to, if your contract is representing your project budget and you don't want to, you know, tip your hand or open your kimono or whatever you want to say to that, you could elect to not publish those across the network. I'll hang an asterisk on that because if you're using collaborative invoicing and the supplier is able to punch into your procurement site to do their invoicing, they do have visibility to those amounts. Okay, so I'm going to put that out there. We're going to scroll down. All of this information was brought in through the supplier record. So again, we talk about shared data, shared master data. The vendor, all of this data here is based on what's in our procurement solution. Okay, so this is the stuff that's in our details for the vendor supplier. And then we look at supplier location. Now, supplier location does not exist in the world of contracts really, but it does from a procurement standpoint as to like where we're going to buy. You're going to see your preferred ordering method. So this happens to be a manual supplier. Okay. Now, do I want to create the subscription for the non-catalog item? This is the part that sort of pushes those items out into the catalog space, making them available for purchase. So I'm going to say yes. Do I have a release required? So if I have a release required, that means the individual has to create the purchase order in order to buy against this. I'm going to elect no so that you can see some of the other stuff that comes along with this. Do I allow invoicing against the contract? Yes. Well, you might say to yourself, why would I say no to a release and no to an invoice? If I was creating a master agreement, it's really meant to be a shell just to aggregate, accumulate against. It's not meant for procurement activity necessarily, so that might be a reason to select no on those. Do I want to close this contract when it meets its maximum limit? The default is no. I could still select yes, and that way the system will basically close out my my contract when it's hit its max limit. I don't have to come in and think about that too much, right? Do I want to default my invoice requester from the contract? I'm going to say yes in this instance. Do I want to allow my suppliers to add non-catalog items? I'm going to say no in this instance. Allow supplier to edit the invoice unit price. For me, I'm going to select no. But these all have, you have the option to do these things. Do I want to allow them to enter invoice accounting? Maybe I do. That sounds like fun. And do I need to allow receiving against the contract? For me today, I'm going to say no just to kind of get us through this, but you can have your 2- or 3-way match just by doing that. I should note, in your receiving type rules, for the commodity that's mentioned here, you may have manual receiving turned on, but for the purposes of this contract, you don't need it, right? So this overrides what's in the contract. For anything that's applied to the contract, it will override that rule. It doesn't change it for anywhere else in the system, but just for the items that are applied to this contract, they will not require receiving. So that is a nice way to have just, a set of rules specific to this. All right. Maximum limit. So minimum commitment. Are you obligated to buy X amount of dollars from the supplier? And if you don't, is there a penalty? So if that's the case, let's use your minimum commitment. And you can notify somebody if you're getting close to the end of the contract and you haven't spent enough. Maximum limit, it's going to, by default, it's going to pick up what I put into my contract amount. Now, if I did elect BPO, yes, this is a required field. So that is another difference. It doesn't preclude you from having a maximum amount on your standard contracts, but if you elect BPO, you must have a value here. Do I want to exclude the taxes and charges from the calculation? So I've got $150,200, I think, yeah, $150,250 as my total. Do I want to include tax and charges as part of that 150? If I don't, I can exclude them and they will not accumulate against that. All right, that's available when I'm doing invoice against contract. Do I have a hard limit? No, these are things I can elect. Additional approvers, if I need somebody to approve based on the maximum or minimum limits, do I need anybody else to be notified? Expiration date notification. notifications of other people about the minimum, maximum commitments, preload. So let's just say that this was originally a 3-year contract. I bring in Ariba, I stand up my solution, and I'm already 1 year into that contract of spend. I want my contract management tool to show that I had a $1 million contract, but I don't want my users to be able to spend all $1 million. I only want them to spend what is left of that contract. I can preload amount, and that will, so I still reflect the full contract amount, but not the spend amount is different. The spend is now going to be $5,000 less. I can also do some forecasting. So if I want to forecast, a portion of this or the total, I can look at my savings and I can look at the frequency. Robust forecasting tool. It's just meant to capture some data for reporting. So we do have a couple of fields in the contract workspace fact tables that allow you to report out the forecasted spend. Let's go next. So pricing terms. Since I've selected no release, invoice against contract item level, you're going to see that I have materials and services, fixed and recurring fees, and costs and expenses. As I change those attributes in my pricing terms, like if I did release required, likely I'm only going to have materials and services. It's going to behave very much like a catalog item. So each of these is going to have different types of, now this particular supplier actually does have a catalog already in here, so that's why I'm getting some items, but we're going to act as if they didn't have anything. I'm going to come in and I'm going to pick up my commodity code just to get rid of that, and I'm going to call it lab item 001, and a unit of measure, I can change that to each, and then this has a price. So there's no quantity based on it. This is a catalog item that I'm creating. So this item is $3.62 per whatever laboratory workstation. Okay. You're going to see, though, it's also required to have a part number. So I'm kind of using today's date as the supplier part number. And so you can see that that is there. It has to be unique. You cannot use the same part number for all your parts in here, but you could just put an A, an ABC on the end of it and it would work. So there we go. And so I have this item. And once I add the item, you can see now I'm presented with, do I want to limit what users can buy by quantity or amount? So maybe this is an item that once I start to purchase over $1,000 worth, or let's just say, so the maximum amount becomes $1,000. Once it becomes over $1,000, I have to treat it as an asset, and so I have a different control mechanism. So I can only allow users to have $1,000 per invoice or per release on this item, and at which time then it needs to go through a different buy process, right? Pricing and discounts, by default we have none. Tiered pricing means the more I buy, the pricing changed, and you can see it can be amount or quantity based. So, and I can have volume price discount or volume based pricing. So if the discount, I'm going to give a percent, the price, I'm going to say an actual price. So if I say, my minimum amount, that's an amount based, right? So let me just go quantity and say my minimum quantity when it's 1, I said it was 362, but once I get to ordering 4, it becomes $3, and once I get to 10, it becomes $275. Okay, and you can continue in that realm. So anything from 1, 2, or 3, it's going to be $362. Once I hit 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, it's going to be $3. Once I hit 10. Now the other thing is I can do this cumulatively across all of the orders that are being done in my organization or per order. So if I personally am putting in an order, I have to cross that threshold. If I say cumulative, it's the first person that crosses that threshold of whatever to get there. So I'm trying to get really fast. So we talked about shared data. Here's some more shared data. I can redefine where this gets accounted for if I want to, just by doing that. If I don't, users just code it when they create their requisitions or the invoice. The cost center, again, would normally default based on the user, but we can put all of that in. There we go. Fixed and recurring is going to be just like we said, like a fixed item. So you're going to see here, you can have recurring dates. So if this was something I wanted to recur monthly, and the amount will be $5. So we'll just make it $5, and I do have to put in, there we go, I have to put something in. Now, the fact that this particular commodity code is coded as a service, you're going to see it brings in some other additional fields and expected value and overall limit. So let me, just to keep this clean, let me put in supplies so that it comes into material and we don't have those items. But it works with service, I guess is what I'm getting at, and so we should be fine. But no supplier part number here, and this is just something that's going to happen $5 a day, right? And then costs and expenses. You think about you're working on a project and maybe somebody needs to buy materials, right? They need to buy some materials that get that project done, and so you put that in. And oh, I definitely don't want a service in this area. I'll put a generic code in. And I'm just going to, again, put a maximum in here. And this is sort of your bucket of money that you can spend against for your project. So, oh, nope, I don't want services. Let me come back in here. Have something. Select that. Okay, good. Should do it. Hopefully that's all mapped. All right. Milestones, those are in our project. When I reach a certain deliverable in the project, I'm able to come in and verify it. So here, I'm going to say deliverable 1, my commodity code, again, so this might come in as a service, and how much am I going to pay them when this is delivered? And I expect this to be done by next Friday. Anyone? It's a free form, so I just put in, there's no email address or anything, it's just a name in here. And I'm going to notify myself 2 days before it's due that I need to come in here and, I have a milestone to be verified. So that might be my point at which I'm going to check in with Messiah and say, hey, how's it coming along? Do you need any help? Are you going to deliver on time? If an invoice comes in against this milestone and it's not confirmed, it does not get paid. So it works very much like a receipt. My access controls, this lets me say who can create invoices against, because there's no release. If there was a release, I'd have a release access in here. Payment terms will default based on what I have in the supplier. If you have multiples, you can change your payment terms. So maybe for this particular contract, I'm usually standard net 60, but for this particular contract, the items on it we've agreed will be paid net 45. I could change that. Appendices or attachments, and then my summary. So summary is just going to show me all the things that I put in here. I'm going to go ahead and save this. And then as I get through, I think I need to finish so I can mark that complete. I need to view this so that I can just take a look at it, I think, and I'm going to go ahead and submit this. This is not what you would normally do, just saying. I'm going to go ahead and approve that one, click OK. And so those are all done. I don't think I have to do anything yet. That one's fine. So the next thing is to publish the contract workspace. Now, I actually have to mark it complete before I do it. And the reason being is because you're going to see in a moment. Sorry, I'm going to come over here. And because the next thing it's going to go in and do its thing. So it's going to actually put this through the publishing process. And if I hadn't completed that task, it would have told me that I couldn't submit it because my tasks weren't complete. So I'm going to take a look. This is my contract now. So it's just a watcher. I can go back to my contract workspace, and we're going to see it's in a publishing status. So this will change as it goes through time. We're going to see in my spend tab here, I have that. It'll get approved, but in my total spend, yep, I'm not seeing my preload amount yet because it hasn't been fully approved. Once it's fully published, fully approved, you'll start to see that there's going to be some total spend in here. So we'll just let that go for now. It's still publishing. All right, let me get back into my deck here. And in the meantime, do we have any questions?
There are a bunch that came in. So why don't we go ahead and finish up the webinar, and while we do the poll questions, maybe I can go ahead and read the questions to you, and maybe you can answer.
Okay. So the release approval, that would be the requisition that would be generated. That unless we provide specific rules in the approval process, it behaves the same as a standard requisition, but we can create, there's a filter rule that allows us to just say it can be automatically approved if they're all covered by a contract and the requester has the permission to create those contracts. So that's a nice thing. We don't have to put it through a double, right? But we have to go in and configure that. We saw these allowing the invoice against contract or allowing the receiving, so no release order contracts. There's no release to be issued against them. We can allow the direct receiving. We can allow the direct invoicing. These are great for like we call bookkeeping purposes. That's the master agreement where we're not going to have much, everything will just be disabled against it. So it's just a shell master agreement that it's accumulating spend against it. And we talked about the costs, expenses, milestones, and fixed fees. So those are the item types. We had a no release. That's exactly what we did here. We put that up. These are great for monitoring, quality of work through the deliverables, whether services are delivered, uncharged, and ongoing payments for those recurring types. We also, I didn't talk about it here, it's a bit of an advanced feature, but we do have the ability to auto invoice and auto release against contracts. So if we have subscription-based, or think about things that are very fixed, like a rent or a lease agreement where they're fixed, we can have the system automatically generate invoices and or releases based on that fixed recurring schedule that we saw in there. And you may also want, and the invoice, you may want it based on a receipt, right? So that's when we would want a receipt, just so that we say, okay, yes, we received the services this month, go ahead and pay the invoice. Okay. The blanket purchase order, we talked about this a little bit, very good for repeated purchases. They're only used, they can be released or no release. That's what I wanted to say. So many people confuse a BPO with needing an actual purchase order, and it does not. It does not have to have. The BPO is sent to the supplier, but it's really nice because it puts it in the supplier's inbox so it can be seen there. So it can be either type. It does not have to have a release against it. They're sent to suppliers on the Ariba network. So if the supplier is not on the Ariba network, and this can be standard or full enterprise account, it doesn't matter, they can both see the BPO. So that they can see the BPO and their accumulators. A non-BPO contractors are not sent to the suppliers like a purchase order is on the Ariba network, but they can always punch in if you have collaborative invoicing to see their list of contracts. So it's a little bit different, but so the BPO is really nice about delivering it into the inbox of the supplier. If you have a fully integrated supplier, this is probably not as necessary as somebody who is not. If you don't allow collaborative invoicing, they can invoice against the no release order item level BPO directly on the Ariba network using a purchase order to invoice flip process. So that's a benefit too. If you do allow the collaborative invoicing, they can select the BPO, commodity catalog, or supplier level, excuse me, from their inbox on the Ariba network and then punch into your site to start creating the invoice, kind of like we do in the invoice entry field. So that's really a nice experience for them. I mentioned earlier the maximum limit is required on a BPO. This is just to show you how the pricing, so, we talked about those tiered discounts, what the supplier level versus the item level, non-catalog item level, what types of things that they support as far as discount types. So it was just a nice checklist. Generating the subscription, that's the piece that puts it over into the catalog area, so we can then search for the items, manage their visibility, the auto catalog creation. So this is nice also that those items get automatically removed from the catalog when the contract closes, and they're just searchable like any other catalog content. Discount pricing, we showed and talked about this, right? Percentages and prices. Milestones, we talked about those. With releases, with no releases, the access control. We didn't really see a lot of this only because I didn't put a release on here, but we did have the access control as to who could actually edit, and I put that in as myself, right? So we saw the access control. When you do have the release, this is what it looks like with a release. Okay. Talked about payment terms, appendices. This is just the process flow. I think I might have copied something twice. So I think we're good, or yeah, this is all. This is the three-way match. This is how they work. So we talked about these fields as well, and I gave you your demo. So I'm going to stop here because I want time to be able to talk, and I know we're running over time. So why don't you take the presenter role, run the poll, and I'll answer questions as we go.
Okay. Sure. I'll go ahead and open up the poll. But before we go on, just to let you guys know that Alice will go ahead and send out this presentation deck after this meeting. So if you're wondering if you will receive it, you will. So
yes.
All right. Let me change myself to a presenter here.
And I do appreciate everybody who just takes a moment to answer the poll. The poll helps us maintain this webinar program. It lets us know that, not necessarily by the topic itself, but, that overall you're using these and how you're using these.
Okay.
And that they can be
the
fun,
poll
too.
is open. Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. So the poll question has been opened. So let me go ahead and read these questions that came in. And after that, maybe we can go ahead and, open up the line even if we have enough time. So the first question is there a way to run the report only for contract terms information?
There is a contract request fact table, yes.
Okay. Is there integration of pricing conditions of S/4HANA with contract compliance?
So I'm not really sure what that integration would look like, but we have the contract line item details. So if those pricing conditions are in the contract line item details, we can bring them in to Ariba, and then we can publish them as instead of creating a contract term document the way I did, we could use the contract line item document and create terms off of that. So I'm hoping that answered the question. If we need more to.
Okay. Okay. Alice, are you there? Can you hear me?
I'm still here. I can hear you.
Oh, okay, good. Okay, it was breaking up. All right. So, if you still are not clear, then maybe you can go ahead and contact your, BPC representative to discuss more, or, you can go ahead and unmute yourself by press star 6. After, I go ahead and read through all these questions. So go ahead and we can, okay. Next question is, which functionalities I have only if the customer are using SAP Ariba Buying, no SAP Ariba Sourcing, and no SAP Ariba Contract Management.
Right. So with regard to what we did today, if they have buying only, they would have the contract compliance piece at the part where we started the terms document. So when I got into that 7-step wizard, that is where a buying only customer begins their contract creation. So they don't have any of the management piece. It doesn't give them as robust a contract management experience, but they can create pricing terms for themselves.
All right. What kind of business issue could be resolved when using Ariba S2C? Is that sourcing to contract, maybe?
Source to contract, yeah. So, well, okay. So a little out of scope for today's conversation, but if I'm source to contract, so I maybe I have something that I've never bought before. I've decided that I'm going to buy doorknobs today, and so I go out through discovery and I find suppliers that provide doorknobs, and I invite them to a sourcing event where they're going to give me their proposals on doorknobs of whatever specification I ask for. And at the end of that sourcing event, I award one of those suppliers, and the doorknob components become, my contract items now. So those doorknobs are now my, the doorknob items that they, with the pricing become my contract terms, and I buy. And so the idea is that everything I'm sourcing, I'm buying compliantly. So I'm not buying other doorknobs. I'm not buying from other suppliers. I'm maximizing my sourcing events. And so the idea is that maybe the next time I go to buy doorknobs, I'm getting a better price because now I'm putting all of my spend towards a single supplier who gave me really good terms. And that's kind of a really 10-second view of source to contract to buy. So let's go to the next one, please.
Right. Okay. So Ariba Contract Compliance is SAP Ariba Buying with Contract Compliance? That's a question.
It's not a separate SKU. I don't know if you heard the beginning of the presentation, but it's not a separate SKU. So it's just features that we turn on in the solution to be able to use it. So if you have SAP Ariba Buying, you can turn on contract compliance. Actually, if you only have catalogs, I think you can even turn on compliance and use an element of compliance for the catalogs. So it's just features that we turn on, a set of parameters and features, no SKU based.
Okay, next question. I actually answered this one, but I think it's good to be answered by you as well. If you are suite integrated, can you just go into the contract terms and create the contract, or must you start in the contract workspace?
You must start in the contract workspace. Once you have contract management and you are suite integrated, you must start with the workspace.
That's what I answered. Yep.
If you don't like that answer, go ahead and open up in community community influence. You may find that one out there.
Okay. Can you provide explanation of the contract types? Is there any explanation in Ariba Connect?
There probably is in the product documentation, and I know I provide it in this deck. So rather than me just reading through that, I'm going to, and I'm assuming you mean the supplier, the catalog, the commodity, and the item type, also the master sub and standalone types. If you're talking like sales agreement to procurement, those two are defined in the product documentation, but not in my deck today. So
I see.
just to save time and allow for other questions, I'm going to just tell you to, look at the product documentation or the deck today.
Okay. Just to let you know, the poll has closed. Alice, we still have 6 more questions in a chat. Do you want to go ahead and answer that? Or
if we can get through them, I'd like to get them answered so they're on the recording, so anybody who just couldn't attend today has the benefit of them. So I do like to do that if folks don't mind.
Okay. How do we add line items with price that applies for all locations? So, for example, if there are 10 locations, do we have to add the same item with same price as 10 locations with different locations within it?
So I'm not sure how you're defining locations. If you mean at a purchasing unit level, then you may end up with 10 contracts based on, those 10 purchasing units. Remember, you can copy, and even the pricing terms, we didn't show it here, but the pricing terms can be exported, and you can import a pricing term from one to another. We can also have a thing called linked documents that we can use when using combined spend. So there's a couple of different ways to make that easier on you, but just depending on what location means to you, I'm going to say you may need to. Yes, that might be. If purchasing unit is your location, we may need to do that.
Got it. Okay. Now, next question. Can you create additional tasks? I believe this is something thing you are demonstrating, the contract compliance part.
Mm-hmm.
There was like a, approval task. I think she's asking if there is a way to add additional task.
Yes, based on your role in the team, you can add a task. The tasks that were there were based on the template that I was using. So if I used a different template, it might have had 20 tasks in it. But if I wanted to, as the contract manager, I could add tasks to what's already there in the template. I just have to keep the ones that are there that are mandatory.
Okay. Is there a resource that provides visibility into which fields can be changed, adjusted, for example, made mandatory versus non-mandatory on the contract terms document?
I'm not aware of a printed resource or product documentation. That is definitely a support question. You'd probably have to ask it on a one-off basis to support. And Masayo, if you know better than I do, please chime in.
Yeah, I believe you could control some of the fields. It is for field configuration. And that in that, each field, you can make it mandatory or not mandatory. And you're not going to be able to do it. Ariba will need to do it for you, but you can go ahead and submit service request to request doing that.
But is there a list anywhere of which ones can or cannot be? I think that was the question, and I don't know the list.
So, yeah, basically, if it's just out-of-box system fields, it's already done deal. So it's tough to make these, changes. But if it's like a custom fields that are included in a, contract terms document, for that, for sure, you can make it mandatory or, not mandatory. You can do that. All right. Next question. Is there any way to integrate Ariba Strategic Sourcing module and SAP Material Management module?
I believe that's what Contract Line Item Details does. Brings the material master in. So that's a little outside of this conversation, so we can have somebody from BPC talk to you about that.
The last question. So can the approval flow on the release order be determined by contract, or is it set for all to be the same auto approval?
So if you're saying every individual contract has its own individual approval process, that would have you wouldn't want to use templates then, and that could be a very cumbersome process. We would not consider that best practice, but technically speaking, yes, you could do that. Again, so that would mean at the point that the contract manager is creating that workspace, they're identifying who needs to approve all those tasks that need to be done, those approval tasks. I see. Not a recommended best practice, but could be done.
Got it. Okay. Going back to the 10 location questions that we had, he came back and said, clarified that the location as a plant. Does it ring any bells?
Yeah. So plant location is yeah. So that shouldn't matter. If the pricing is the same by location, then the location is just a ship to location in an item when we're creating an item level item, and that can be changed when the user adds it into a requisition. So that wouldn't be a problem. And the supplier can also change it at the point of invoice if we allow for certain edit rules. So that should be fine. You wouldn't need to necessarily create an item if the pricing is exactly the same per location, you don't need to change that. You don't need to create an item per location. It's when you have different terms by location that you would want to probably do that.
I see. Okay. That was the last question in the chat. We could stay for a couple more minutes. So if you guys have any questions, you can go ahead and unmute yourself by pressing *6. So you can go ahead and speak, and Iris can go ahead and answer your question via phone. Do you guys have any questions before we go? Okay, Iris, do you have anything you'd like to add or anything?
Just that I would like to thank everybody, including you, Masayo, for excellent and very engaged session. If you have any other questions that were not answered today, feel free to reach out to us. If you're a partner, we have a link to Partners Edge where you can also ask questions and have resources available to you. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and we hope to see you soon.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a good day, and thank you, Iris.
You too. You're welcome. Bye.
Bye.
The leader has dropped from the call, and if the leader doesn't dial back in and rejoin, the conference will be terminated. 30 minutes.